Hello and welcome to the Happy PharmD podcast. I'm Dr. Alex Barker, CEO, founder of the Happy PharmD, where we get pharmacist jobs that they absolutely love. And with me today is a former client of mine when I started the Happy PharmD way back in 2017, when some of you were, I don't know, going to parties and stuff in high school. And since then, since 2017, Tim has blown his potential out of the water. I talk a little bit about his story in the beginning of this episode, and you won't want to miss it because in this, we're going to be talking about a lot of the different ways that we think about money and how it holds us back from really creating a fulfilling life and career. Tim has amazing insights as a pharmacist and as a financial founder for a CPF company, a certified financial planner company. You won't want to skip this episode because, I mean, who doesn't want to have more money? So you gotta listen. And with that, let's transition however we're going to do that. Hey, Tim, thanks for hanging out with me for the podcast.
Excited to be here.
You and I, we constantly run in the same lanes. We're always talking about pharmacists, and I talk about careers. You talk about finance. You and I go way back for when you just started with a book and a blog.
Yeah.
Right. I was starting off as a coach that got into pharmacy. And I don't know how you'll take this because, Tim, I don't know if anyone's ever told you this, but you have the air of a professor.
Oh, geez.
You are, I really appreciate you, and I so love your insights and how you think, because it is different than how I think about problems. But I never know how to read you.
Just like a good professor, right?
Exactly. You have this air of mystery about you. And I have had to convince myself years ago that Tim does actually like me. Like I'm not bothering him. And it's not that you're arrogant or anything. It's just you have this air of mystery about you, I suppose.
Well, if Jess was sitting next to me, if my wife was sitting next to me now, she would nudge me and say, see, Tim, do you see what I'm talking about? Alex is talking about right now. Like when we're talking with a couple and afterwards I'll reflect, or, whoever we're talking, I'm like, oh, that was a really interesting conversation. I really like them. And she's like, your nonverbals didn't say as much.
Once again, pharmacists need to work on their soft skills. That's okay.
Yeah.
That's all right.
Yeah, that's right.
But
So good observation. Yeah.
The thing I've appreciated the most about you over the years is the way you think about the bigger picture. And I also admire how you've gone from, book and a blog to, well, that's when I first was introduced to you.
Yeah.
To really full on getting into your business, quitting academic job, now running your financial pharmacist full time. I believe your official title is CEO, right?
Something like that. CEO / janitor, everything in between. Yes,
Nice.
that's right. Yeah.
Good. That's what a good leader does.
Yeah.
And what I'm excited to talk to you about is really the wisdom you've learned from working with hundreds of pharmacists about balancing what they want financially and then what they want with their careers.
Yeah.
So I have a friend who plays a lot of video games, and he's my neighbor. He told me he was pumping me up. He found a pharmacist playing this weird spaceship game, and he said, so how do you like your job? And the pharmacist said, oh, I hate it. And he said, oh, well, you should talk to my friend. This is kind of like what he does.
And he likes video games. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. He said, I hate it, but the money is so good. And I've talked with a lot of people on your team, and there is this sentiment of, I'm stuck in a job that either I'm okay with it,
Yeah.
it's there. Things could be better, but it's there, or they just downright don't enjoy it. And yet there's this thought of, I have to stay in this because I'm living to my means,
Mhm.
or I'm living up to my means, if not beyond that. When you think about balancing these desires that pharmacists have with what they want financially and then their work, what do you feel like is like the typical prison bars that people put up around themselves?
Yeah, you're spot on, Alex, and obviously we're making, some generalizations, right, for the sake of a good discussion. There are many pharmacists that I've talked with who love the work that they're doing, and they're passionate about the impact that they're having on their patients. They're not overwhelmed and burned out and stressed. They make a good income, and I feel like they are in that, kind of balanced sweet spot. There are also many that are very much in the opposite, which is, hey, I'm in this position that I'm overwhelmed, I'm stressed, I'm burned out, I'm 33 and I've got how many more years to do this? And, I've got to save 10% of my income so I can save up how many millions to maybe at some point in the future have a break and hope that I'm still healthy enough and young enough to live a rich life then. And that is the prison bars that I see. And I use that word lightly because at the end of the day, if we zoom out, like we're still really, really, really fortunate, right? You look at the median household income in the United States, let alone internationally. In the United States, and a pharmacist, they used to double as a N of one, double the median income. That's changed slightly because median income has gone up faster than a pharmacist's income has gone up.
Yeah.
But nonetheless, we could agree that a pharmacist, even if they're unhappy in their job, like they're making a really, good income, at least in comparison, to what we see, nationally. However, like it's okay to be grateful and still want something else. I think both of those things can be true. And I think one of the things I've been thinking a lot about lately, Alex, is the stories we tell ourselves and the impact that those stories have on the perception of what may often not even be reality, but then we take action from that perception, which may not be reality, which comes from the stories we're telling ourselves. And I think one of those stories of many that pharmacists may be telling themselves is, I have to earn this six-figure income, or I have a doctorate degree, and therefore I have to do X, Y, or Z. And I think the result of just these two examples is it very much puts us on a one-road lane where we're thinking about maybe nuances of options within that, but we're still in the same lane. I was thinking about this week, Alex, that, um, I was thinking about it, if I were, for whatever reason, if I were unable to run my business tomorrow, if I were unable to find a job tomorrow, like what would I do? Right. And now
Sure.
granted, I'm assuming there's some level of, reserves or emergency fund or whatever, where you have a period of time where you could weather a storm. Right. Um, and one of the thoughts I had is I think I might drive Uber for a while.
Yeah.
And I think I would specifically try to align Uber opportunities and rides at places where there may be interesting people that I just want to have interesting conversations to learn what are people doing and why are they doing it.
Mm.
Um, and the thought of this came from a book I was reading, and this guy spent time as a limo driver for a period of time. And he was reflecting back on that journey and talking about how through that time as a limo driver, he learned all of these alternative ways that people were earning money, living a rich life today and tomorrow that weren't even on his radar. Right. And I think this gets back to, so much of what we do and how we approach our money, how we approach our career. You can often draw a very direct connection back to the stories we've told ourselves. And often that draws, back to our childhood experiences. Many pharmacists, I would presume, maybe there was a story that went along the lines of something that, hey, what you do is you go to college, you get a really good job, maybe an advanced degree where you're going to have some income stability. By the way, like being a doctor, like that's really awesome. That's prestigious, right? Six-figure income, like that's what you do. That's what success is. And no ill intent in that, but that right then and there, especially if you go into a program at a young age. I went to a 0-6 PharmD program directly out of high school. So at the age of 18, I was put on a one-lane road. And none of it was bad intent, right? But you're on this road that is really going in one direction. And you're in a period of your life where there's very formative years that perhaps there's different experiences, exposure, ideas, or things that you almost have somewhat blinders on because you're just grinding it out, trying to get through pharmacy school and then residency or whatever else. And then to your point, Alex, you wake up, you're 3, 4, 5 years after your pharmacy degree, you're making a good income, but now maybe there's a house, now there's maybe mouths to feed, right? With, kids and a family. And all of a sudden we get to this place that, hey, maybe my income is somewhat fixed or it feels like that. And it just isn't going anywhere near as far as I thought it would.
Mm.
And I think one of the things, I'm actually writing a post on this right now to the class of 2023 of like, these are 10 financial moves I think every class of 2023 grad should take. And one of those is to refuse to accept that your income is fixed. That is a mindset shift. And I think that's so uncomfortable for us. We love the upside of I'm going to graduate from pharmacy school and make $120,000. But what we don't talk about is like that often means someone is 24, 28, 32 years old. And outside of inflation, which many, salaries aren't even keeping up with the pace of inflation, your salary is really at the ceiling of where you're going to go. And that's not just a financial problem, potentially. That's a problem on your psyche, on your mindset, on your ability to feel like you're moving forward and growing and contributing. If you're looking up saying, I've got 30 plus more years to go, I don't feel like there's much room to grow. And if we can shift that and refuse to accept that as a reality, we could talk about, what are other options for growing our income. That starts to open up, some doors and maybe, we see past what you're describing there, some of the prison bars it can be.
If you're watching this or if you're listening on audio, I awkwardly reached for something while Tim was talking. And it wasn't because I wasn't listening. It was because I grabbed my book, Indispensable, which if you want a free copy, go to the website. I'll give it to you for free. The reason why I brought that up is because in it, I discovered a story that back in I think it was the late 1800s, the fastest they thought they could go on trains was about 30 miles per hour.
Mm-hmm.
And they prohibited trains from going faster because they thought women's uteruses would explode. And I share that insane story to totally agree with you that I'm learning about myself that my mind it's really bad at being CEO. It's really good at coming up with stories for things I don't need to worry about. And I don't need to be concerned about finances, the business. It loves to be busy with these worries and fears. And would you say now that in your almost 10 year of running YFP, that you're seeing people's stories change about their finances and their careers? Is there something emerging from that? Is that why you've been thinking about stories?
Yeah, I think there is a lot that's emerging, through that. I do think that just societally and as a profession on a micro level of society, we are having more conversations around this topic.
Yeah.
Which is a step. It's a step number one, right? Because I think we're seeing a level of vulnerability and sharing that's happening financially that, we didn't see even 10 or 15 years ago, certainly a generation before that. And I think what comes from that, the potential fruit is the more vulnerability you have with your financial plan. Not only is that an open door to potentially getting some help, but it also leads to, someone else sharing and, oh, I did this, or I had this idea and I did this. And, all of a sudden I think there can be a very collaborative community type of approach, which is really exciting, to see that I'm not in competition, Alex, with you in any way financially. Like what are you doing? What are you learning? Like, business? What are you learning with how you're teaching your kids about money, how you and your spouse are getting on the same page? Like, let's learn from one another, and collaborate with one another. So I think that's an exciting shift that's happening. I think there is a mindset shift that is also happening, and part of it is the bias I have of being in the pharmacy entrepreneurship circles. I was just sharing with someone last week. I think we're going to look back at this period of time, my prediction is, and say this was really the kind of the beginning phase of us accepting the growth of pharmacy entrepreneurship. And when I say that, I'm speaking outside of, independent pharmacy, which obviously has been, around for a long, long time and serves a very valuable role. But I often share, if you think about the pie chart, Alex, of a pharmacist, graduating class, when we went to school, it was, hey, you either got a job in a community pharmacy. At the time, you could go directly into a hospital job, or you got a residency. And then maybe you had one or two classmates that were doing like something different, than that. And that pie chart is very much shifting, I think, in an exciting way. Part of that is the pressures that we're facing as a profession in terms of, reimbursements and automation and technology and, all the scope of practice issues that everyone listening is very familiar with, that's forcing some of that transition. But, the other side of the coin, if we look at that in a half glass full way, is the pie chart is becoming much more, diverse. And it really feels like this time period we're in is the start of something really significant, that we're going to wake up in 5, 10, 15 years and now a graduating class, like we're all going to be eagerly waiting, sitting on the edge of our seats. Like, I can't wait to hear what this student's doing, this student's doing, because they're all going to be very different. But that again is a mindset shift. Like, to me, the PharmD is a ticket to play the game. But what game we play and what path we go is very much open-ended, but that's uncomfortable. And I think one of the things I'm really passionate about is, if somebody graduates and they're looking at $200,000 student loan debt and they're overwhelmed financially, you lose the willingness and you lose the creativity to play the game in a non-traditional way. Because what's the fastest way to take care of that pain? It's to sign a contract for $120,000.
Right. And to take one of those, I won't say god awful jobs, but jobs where they pay you an insane amount of bonus money and you have no idea what you're walking into. I've talked with quite a few people where the urgency to pay off debt, that debt specifically, is so high that it feels prohibitive for them living the life that they want. And I feel like that kind of urgency is newer. I'm aging myself here, but when I graduated in 2012, there was no sense of, we have tens of thousands of dollars of debt and we'll pay it off over time. It's not a priority. Have you seen this change as well?
I would say I was seeing it, and then that has changed with the pandemic and the pause. That what we're seeing right now is not a whole lot of pain around, student loans, because there's been a 3-year, pause on, having to make those payments. But what I was seeing is exactly what you're describing, which, you and I graduated in 2008. You mentioned 2012. If you look at debt to income ratios, in 2010, the median debt load was $100,000 and the median income was north of that. Well, guess what? We haven't come very far in over a decade on the income side, but the debt loads were pushing north of 170. They've come down a little bit, over the last year or two, partly, I think, because of the pandemic and the pause. So I think there's a lot more pain on, hey, this number looks a lot bigger, and they're feeling the pressures of, salary compression and other things. But I want to spend a moment getting into what you're talking about, which is a really important conversation. Like, there is, we'll talk student loans, but this can more broadly apply to debt. There should be no blanket advice around what somebody should or shouldn't do with $160,000 of debt, or whatever the number is. Like, every person is different. I have these conversations on a daily basis. One of my favorite questions to ask is, where are you at on the student loan pain scale? No right or wrong answer. Like, 0 is they are what they are. They're going to take care of themselves. 10 is like the house is on fire. And I will talk to some people where it's tears. Like, I'm overwhelmed. I'm frustrated. there's an emotional attachment to the debt. I feel like I can't move forward. It's causing, my spouse and I to be fighting about this or that. Whatever is the stress and the anxiety, like that is real. Whether I or anyone else agrees with, what that means and the rest of their financial plan, that is very real to them emotionally. And then there's the other side, which is like, I hope it figures itself out at some point in time. Like maybe it'll forget, whatever. And I think we have to honestly acknowledge that, rather than blanket advice or what is my colleague doing or what is my classmate doing, and then apply that to our career situation, which is why I think these are so intertwined, as well as the goals and aspirations that we have to figure out what a plan is. Because if somebody says to me, Alex, hey, I don't mind paying this off over 20 or 25 years, and I can honestly emotionally, one, believe them, but also that they are okay with them being around, and they look at the budget and say, hey, instead of $2,000 a month, I want a payment that's $300 or $400 a month because I want to start a business, or I want to go invest in this, or I want to take a job that maybe I've got more long-term upside, but I'm going to start at a lower salary because I recognize this is a period of my life where I can take some risk. Whatever is the case, like that's an important distinction of how these paths intersect. And if they just blindly accept, like, I'm going to be paying $2,500 or $3,000 a month, and maybe they haven't thought about whether or not that makes sense for them and what they want to do. Well, if that's the path forward, no right or wrong answer, but that's very much going to lead to some of those feelings of like, I have to be in this job making $120,000, $130,000 because I have myself fixed in this payment. Yeah. And then a whole nother conversation of this would be just around the loan forgiveness pathways and other things that, allow people, if it's a good fit, to start thinking more strategically and play offense and not be in this defensive mindset. And that's what's so important. This from personal experience. I know this from personal experience. It's not just the numbers, it's the mental weight that some of this carries.
Yeah.
And whether you decide to aggressively pay off debt or not, the peace of mind and clarity that can come from just knowing that you've looked at the options, you figured out a game plan that matches up with your goals and how you emotionally feel about the situation, whether that number is $300 a month or $3,000 a month, having that clarity is what is going to allow us to take steps forward rather than having that feeling of like, I'm overwhelmed, I'm frustrated, I'm confused, I don't know where to go. Like, how can you ever do anything opportunistic if that's the mindset that we're living in?
Yeah.
We can't.
It's a great way to get stuck. But you have the distinct pleasure, I'm sure, of seeing a lot of people change over time. Once someone has a plan, a lot of that worry, it goes away, right? Which is why people hire financial advisors. Would you say then creating a plan is the first step to changing the mindset? Or do you think something else happens in that moment when they change the way they think in order to have a different outcome?
Yeah, I think it's intertwined. I mean, I think by implementing the foundations of a plan, right, that's always changing. You and I know that the plan we had 10 years ago, the plan we have today, it's never you set it and you leave it. Life evolves, financial goals change. But I think the plan part of it often does lead to a mindset shift. For us and what we see, an important part of the start of the plan, as simple as and obvious as it sounds, is step one is you get organized. For many people, they've never gotten their financial house in order to know all of the numbers, all the accounts, where are things located. So we got to have visibility, number one. Number two is we have to set the plan and the vision of where we're going before we start to execute on any one part of the plan. And again, as simple as that sounds, like most people aren't organized in their financial documents. Most people, say things like, hey, I want to save $3 or $4 million, but there's no why or reason behind that.
Yeah.
And we have to make the vision come to life. That, to me, Alex, is the piece that shifts the mindset, right? If the vision is, hey, the reason I'm working this job, the reason we're saving for the future, the reason we're doing any one part of this financial plan is because of these 3, 4, 5 things, short and long term. I was just talking to someone today that, they have a young family that's growing. They got desire and goals to go to Disney, each and every year. They're planning for the future with a vacation home or rental property. The more specific we get with the vision, why that matters to them, timeline, dollar amounts, like that often leads to the mindset shift of, hey, what do I need to do to be able to get there? But if we just adopt ourselves into this system of like, yeah, I know I'm supposed to put a money away in my 401k. And yeah, somebody said I should have an emergency fund. Yeah, I got to pay off my student loans. Like there's no energy, there's no juice there. There's no momentum and shift. And when it comes to things like accepting our income is not fixed, the motivation of that really falls off if we don't have a clear vision of where we're trying to go and why we're trying to go there. So
my mind goes to wanting to talk to Chat GPT about coming up with my financial plan and what I need exactly to do and when to buy Bitcoin, right? Like that's what I need.
it's funny you mentioned that. I asked ChatGPT recently. I was doing a presentation, which I've done for years, on like the 5 foundations you're getting started. Like these are the building blocks of the financial plan. And I was just curious. I'm like, what does ChatGPT think is the foundations of the financial plan? And I used that terminology. I kid you not, Alex. It was like 5 for 5. And I was like, well, that's really interesting. And we didn't even get into the back and forth of, some of the individual conversation, but.
Well, for our listeners, I'm sorry, but Tim and I, we hang out a little bit, and I've got some exciting things to tell you, Tim, after this podcast. I'm working on some really cool stuff.
Love it.
So for our listeners who may be identifying that they have financial constraints, right? And they see how finances have been a driver to accept conditions within their work or their life that are prohibiting them. What in that situation, knowing what you know now and knowing that you've helped so many people, what would you do if you just came to this new knowledge and you also gained all this other knowledge that you have?
The first thing that comes to mind, which is truly first thing to mind, we didn't prep right for this podcast. The first thing that comes to mind is you have to take one step in the direction that starts to take some of the control back of the scenario that you're in, right? So if somebody comes to me and they say, hey, Tim, I'm overwhelmed with the financial plan. I'm frustrated. I'm confused. I've got maybe some credit card debt. I don't have a solid emergency fund. Maybe I don't have the equity in the home that I want. I'm behind on retirement savings. I still got student loans hanging around, right? These are things that I hear on the regular. To paint a picture for them of financial independence where they're no longer depending on work is so far off in the distance and so unrealistic in the moment that not only is it not helpful, but it's overwhelming. Especially for many pharmacists that are like, where's the checklist? Like, what do I need to be doing, to move this forward? So the problem I often see is that the feeling of burned out and, I'm frustrated, I'm overwhelmed. Certainly, workplace conditions are a big part of that. But anytime you feel like you don't have any choice or control, that eats away at your soul. And what I mean by that is when you have obligations, that you're trying to meet, whether it's student loans or credit card or retirement savings or all these financial commitments, and you are 100% dependent on that paycheck, such that if something were to happen tomorrow, that all of those other things are going to get derailed. That's where, you describe the prison scenario. That's where that loss of control can eat at you over time. And if it happens long enough, you become numb over to it to a certain degree. And so it's, what is one step I can take over the next 3 months? How do we build on that with step number 2, step number 3? We talk about some of the baby steps of the financial plan around the emergency fund and knocking out some of the high interest rate credit card debt. It could be, making sure we've got a plan around the student loans. To be honest, when you're first taking the first step, I don't even care what the step is, as long as it's a baby step forward. And what we're shooting for is step forward action. We see a result, even if it's a tiny result in the big vision of where we want to go. And we're building from that point of confidence, right? It reminds me of the book, The Compound Effect by drawing a blank, Hardy. forget his first name, Darren Hardy, I think. And really the formula of, it's true with money. It's true with how we spend our time. It's true with professional development. It's true in the relationships we live every day. It seems like a small micro commitment or step in any given day. You look back over 30 days, 60 days, 90 days, a year or a decade, things start to happen, right? That's the compound effect in finance. It's the time value of money. Same thing here, a micro step or commitment of control, taking back a little bit of that power equation. Over time, we're starting to put the building blocks in place that if I'm in a terrible workplace condition, I can speak up with a little bit more voice, or I can look for other opportunities. I can pursue the position that maybe pays $10,000 less, but gives me more mobility and flexibility on upside. But when we have no control, like those aren't even options that are on the table.
Yeah.
And when you look at, Alex, some of the literature around satisfaction in the workplace, autonomy comes up over and over again. And I think that's true here as well, that like when you feel you have no autonomy in the choice of how you're spending your time because of all these other commitments that we have, that's a grind. And I think that you add that on top of the workplace conditions and the other things we're seeing, and that's just a recipe for, people getting burned out.
Taking back control. I love it. If I was in that situation of feeling stuck, not being able to get out, and just like wanting that freedom, and specifically leaning into curiosity, right?
Mm-hmm.
That you talked about earlier. It is not the end of the world if you were to save up, right, 12 months of expenses and quit your job and spend time doing all of the things that are on your to-do list and learning a new skill and talking with people, going to networking things and finding out what's going on in your community. There's so many great things to do with your life, to work from 24 to 65 or whenever it is that we'll be retiring in the future. Like that, there's so much more. And I feel like if I had to do this all over again and I didn't make the same decisions I made, I would have loved a year off to figure life out, to figure myself out and find a job then, right? And even if I wasn't close at near the end of the year, it is not impossible with today's market to even find something part-time. Like it is not that challenging. It may not be the ideal place, but
I think that perspective is, the freedom and that perspective and shift of, what is the real risk calculation? And I'm hesitant to say this because I don't want this to be interpreted as,
financial advice.
Well, financial advice. I don't want this to be interpreted as over glorification of entrepreneurship or taking risks that people shouldn't take. But, Tim Ferriss talks a lot about this. I would agree with him. We tend to give risk way too much credit and the fear that, comes with it. One of the questions, people ask me periodically is, hey, I don't do direct patient care. I haven't done direct patient care for over a decade. If you have a pharmacy related question, like don't ask me, you need to go talk to your local pharmacist, right? Why do you keep your license? And the answer I always share is like, it's the greatest emergency fund of all time. In terms of options that it were to pursue. And I think to your point, like maybe those aren't anything that you or I would want to do tomorrow, but if things hit the fan, like there are opportunities there. And I think we concoct these worst case scenarios in our mind to be something that are highly unlikely, sometimes unrealistic completely.
Absolutely.
Which really gets back and probably takes us into a whole nother discussion, maybe for another day, of like, why in our mind, why is the ceiling as low as it is, but the floor as deep as it is? Like that's it. I think for many pharmacists, right? I'm not even kidding on that. For many pharmacists, the ceiling is $120,000, $130,000. Like that is the ceiling, but the floor is like
homelessness, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. And I'm sure you've had these thoughts too as a founder where I feel like I've just now overcome them. But the feeling of everything I built, everything I've worked so hard is just tomorrow, it's going to be done, like game over.
Mhm.
I'm a loser. I'm a disgrace. I've shamed my family. I'm gonna have to go back to my job, and everyone's going to think I'm a loser. Like, I'm guessing where the source is probably our childhood, but I'm not a psychologist.
Yeah, and Gay
Frank
Hendricks talks
Kelly.
about that in The Big Leap, right? The concept of the ceilings that we put on
Yeah,
ourselves and the floors as well. But
that's mandatory reading, The Big Leap by Gay Hendricks, for our team. Uh,
yeah, it's
and
good.
it has such an effect. In fact, we just recorded a podcast episode with Tamar Church, who is our vice president of sales and marketing. And that book began a huge shift in her mindset, just how she was
Mm,
thinking about herself. And I can attest that in the last like 3 months, it's just so much potential is unlocking within her. Um, Truly, all of this stuff begins in the mind: career, finance, health.
that's right.
Every time I have a coach on, even though you have no coach training, or do
Nope.
you? Yeah. Any of these issues, it's always about the way you think,
Mhm.
at the end of the day, which is why I have a coach, because I'm really good at fooling. My mind is really good
Mhm.
at fooling myself.
Absolutely.
Tim,
Old patterns, fooling, I think that the childhood comment is a really good one that, I think often you can draw connections back to, probably very early on, we set a definition of success in our mind, and that was hard, wired, or
yeah,
even the scripts. And I think it's really important for people to have, kids that are listening, like what are the said and unsaid scripts we're passing on? Money scripts, career scripts, attaching value to achievement scripts. I mean, these are everywhere, said and unsaid. And like, I've just come to accept like my children are going to need counseling. Like that's probably all of us should be in counseling. So it's
that's.
not a bad thing.
I'm so glad you said that, because I know, I don't know if it's still going on, but I know at least a couple months ago, if not a year ago, your children had their own business shipping,
Hmm.
and I had a conversation with my daughter just the other week where she was expressing her feelings of jealousy of her sister who has her own Nintendo Switch. I said, "Well, yeah, it's only $300. You can totally save up and work for that money." And she knows how to make money. She shoveled sidewalks during last winter, and
Which is
was
like a
way
year-round activity, right? For you guys
right
shoveling
where
sidewalks.
I live, and way overpaid by generous elderly ladies.
Mhm.
Okay, and I said, "You just got to do that like 10 times." And I can't do that. I can't. That's too
Mhm.
much work. And I was like, my first thought was, you're a failure of a father. Like, you're an entrepreneur. What are you doing? And of course I challenged that thought, but you're right. We all need
Mhm.
therapy in some way. And I think it's interesting now that we even have like financial coaches, people who are not advisors, but
Yep.
just advising people on finance and helping people make more money and enjoy their money, even if it
Mhm.
isn't over $100,000. So,
Yep. Absolutely.
Tim, thank you so much for this conversation. As always, it's a pleasure hearing and sharing your thoughts on finances and balancing these issues and the scripts that we kind of share in our own lives.
Thanks for having me. This was fun.
What an awesome episode. Tim is such a cool guy. If you ever have the chance or opportunity to meet him or talk with him, you won't regret it, because you'll come away probably feeling maybe a little bit inspired, a little bit more empowered, as well as a smidge more smarter. Not as smart as him, as you could clearly tell. The guy knows his stuff. I highly recommend you go to his website, yourfinancialpharmacist.com, where he talks all about financial planning and advising for pharmacists. Thank you for listening to this episode. Hey, if you're on YouTube watching this, would you hit it subscribe? We're trying to get to 1,000 subscribers on YouTube, and I'm shocked that we're like over halfway there by this point. Thank you so much for those of you who do watch this show. And Thank you for your comments, your kind words. We try to read every one, respond to some. There's a lot. And for some, of you who are on your podcast app, hey, you're just as good looking. Don't let you think that I forgot about you. I remember the days when I was on my commute listening to podcasts the whole time. You're just as appreciated. Give yourself a pat on the back. You're a good-looking pharmacist. Thank you for listening to this episode. And if you're ready to take control of your career, you know who to talk to. You're listening to the guy. Go to thehappypharmd.com and start your journey towards a job you love. Thanks for listening to this episode. And until next time, cheers.